everybody, to another week of Eye of the Storm, a Guelph Storm podcast with myself, Ryan Drury, the voice of your Guelph Storm on Rogers TV. Very pleased to be joined by a special guest today. All right, it's time to mix it up. We're going to get another special guest in here, and we're going to talk about a lot of things on here, all right? Memorial Cup's coming to town, different barns all around the CHL, and that's because we're very pleased to be joined by our friend Steve McLean, who's very familiar to Storm Nation and is the host of the All 61, a CHL podcast, and of course mans the website, the All CHL All 60 website, which you can visit anytime and check out his rankings at all60chlpod.com. Let's start there, Steve. You have been to every rink, including many of the former rinks around the Canadian Hockey League. What inspired you to do this, man? Because that's a heck of a travel schedule.
Well, I give a lot of credit to my friend Kevin Jordan, who, don't hold it against him. He is a London Knights fan, but
okay,
he about 20 years ago or so, he created OHLArenaguide.com, which is still active. So a plug for him. And he started traveling with the London Knights back when they had their team of the century in 2005. And he started going to all the rinks, and he posted a website. And I was screwing around one day in high school in a tech class and looking up OHL arenas because I was just kind of starting to get into the league myself, and found his website, and it's all these arenas, and thought I would love to do that one day. And it took me a few more years until I got a driver's license and a car. But, once I started traveling, knocked off the OHL fairly quickly with my team of the time, the Brampton Battalion. Brampton's where I grew up. And by the end of 2009, I had the entire OHL done. And for the next several years, it was just kind of going back and doing OHL games over and over again and having fun with that. But, started going to Memorial Cups. My first one was in Saskatoon in 2013. And so at first I was getting a couple dub and Q rinks here and there. And then it was probably around the late 2010s where we started to go to regular season games. And I think it was after a trip in Eastern Quebec when we did a trip in the fall of 2018 where we hit Chicoutimi, Baie-Comeau, and Rimouski. And those are pretty remote areas. And once we did that, we thought, well, there's no reason we can't do the rest of them. And, really after the pandemic started hammering down and last February got the entire CHL done.
That's incredible, man. I mean, what a journey, and like something that I think a lot of junior hockey fans would be envious of for sure. How did the rankings come into play? Let's talk a bit about the podcast, the All 60, now All 61, of course, yes. CHL podcast. I mean, you get the idea to hit up all the rinks. When did the podcast kind of come into being, and what inspired that aspect of your journey?
Well, so it was just all, it was kind of the situation of I was doing more than just going to games and cheering as a fan. Back in my days with the Brampton Battalion, I started making video highlight packages of the team's games because back in the late 2000s, there really wasn't much of that around on league websites. It was hard to see highlight clips. And of course, that year we had Cody Hodgson and Matt Duchene and Evgeny Grachev. So I made best of compilations then, and they were getting, Matt Duchene, it was his draft year. It's like 50,000 views on those videos. And anyways, eventually Rogers TV did not like that I was posting their highlights. And so the team approached me. And for the last couple of years that the battalion were in Brampton, I was doing highlights for the team website. And when the battalion went away, and it was kind of like I had a whole season of I was just watching hockey, but not doing anything extra. So in the fall of 2014, I created, along with my friend Brian Thompson, who's a Windsor Spitfires fan, we created the OHL Fanboys podcast. And it was just an OHL-centric episode, podcast, I should say. And we did that for 5 seasons, and we would have guests from around the league. And it was a lot of fun, a little bit more vulgar than my current podcast, but we had a great time with it. I got to be media at a couple of Memorial Cups. I got to interview all 3 league commissioners eventually throughout that show. But, by 2019, we were starting to get a little burnt out with it, and Brian was going through some personal things in his life, and he didn't want to do a podcast anymore. us two together was such a dynamic. At the time, I couldn't think of doing one without him. So we ended the show in 2019. And for the next few years, I was fine without doing a podcast. It was nice not to have to produce one every week. But then a couple of years ago, I started getting the itch again. But I knew Brian was still kind of not interested in doing a podcast. And I was thinking, well, I have to come at this with a different angle. What can I do? And in that time, other OHL podcasts had popped up, and I didn't want to just be another one. So I thought, well, what don't we have? Well, we don't have a podcast that covers the entire CHL. You know, there are podcasts based on each league. Let's do one for the entire CHL. And at the time, I was trying to get to all 60. So that's what kind of created the name All 60, and now it's 61 thanks to the new expansion team in the WHL. But come at it. And I have for those who've never listened to the show, the idea is I have a correspondent from each league. We have Patrick McNeil, the radio voice of the Cape Breton Eagles for the QMJHL. Steve Clark, the TV play-by-play man for the Niagara Ice Dogs, and out west, Ryan Schweitzer, who works with the Swift Current Broncos. And those guys really, especially more in the Q and the Dub, they pick up my slack and bring a lot of great information to the show. And of course, my friend Kevin Jordan, he's kind of my travel correspondent. We talk about our road trips too. So each week we have a different guy on, and we catch up with everything going on with all the leagues and our road trips. And people seem to like it so far.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's content that a lot of people are curious about, especially people that want to kind of undertake these road trips, if you will, around the Canadian Hockey League. And there's so much on offer there. And on that note, I mean, obviously there's a lot of differences between the three leagues.
Yes.
Geography would be probably the number one, specifically talking about the Dub.
Yeah.
What's it like touring around in the different leagues, and the difference just in the culture, obviously, the fan bases around junior hockey throughout the different leagues? What are some of the big differences that you noticed and enjoyed about the three different leagues?
We've said along the way that, assuming if you're based in the OHL, the OHL is easy mode, the Q is like intermediate, and the WHL is hard expert mode as far as getting all the rinks done. Now, the good news with the WHL is we kind of, at first, it seems like too daunting of a task to go to all, at the time, 22, now 23 teams out there. And with how spread out they are, basically across half the continent. And what we figured out really quickly was you could hit them in groups, right? So we would go out, we'd fly out for a weekend and do 3 of the Saskatchewan teams, and then we'd come back out and do 3 Alberta teams. We did 4. Kevin finished his all 60 one rink before me. He finished. We did a big U.S. division trip in the fall of 2024. So as far as like on the road in the WHL, you don't see as many visiting fans unless they're like family. Kind of same thing going on in the Q when it's a Maritimes team coming into Quebec. I remember a game in Blainville, which for those who don't know is kind of like a suburb of Montreal, and they were playing the Moncton Wildcats that night. Well, you're not really going to see any Moncton fans driving up a full day's drive on a Thursday, but there was a giant group of Moncton supporters there because of family, right? One of the players was local to the Montreal area. So you get kind of that more than anything. In the other 2 leagues, you don't see quite as many fan buses. They happen, just I don't happen to see them as much. So one thing I've noticed across the CHL too is I think the crowds in the US based teams, they are a little bit crazier than the Canadian fans, and I mean that in a good way. The WHL US teams and the OHL US teams, they tend to have louder crowds, better atmospheres, and I think the difference between there, not that there isn't quote unquote smart hockey fans in those cities, obviously there are, but I think you get a lot more casuals, and they're just there to have a good time. It doesn't matter whether their team is in last place or middle of the standings or top of the standings. They come there, they make noise. It's kind of almost like a football atmosphere more so. You see a lot more tailgating in places like that. And Erie, I think, has had the reputation for a long time, and I still maintain this, that they're probably the loudest fans in the OHL. And I saw some pretty loud crowds in the WHL US rinks too. Seattle, the crowd I saw in Kent, Washington that night wasn't overly large. Maybe the building was a little over half full, and yet they were making way more noise than a game here in a lot of Canadian cities, where I think fans are more intently watching the game. I know I'm kind of like that. I don't make a lot of noise at a Storm game, but I'm just watching, focusing, the play and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the Canadian hockey fans are more of a crowd in general that are like, do something to impress me and I'll make noise.
Yeah.
And they want to see something because they're so, our culture's so intertwined with the game. And a lot of those American markets have gotten the same way. I mean, like talk about Portland, Seattle. I mean, there's just they've turned themselves into great hockey markets. Erie, of course, with a lot of great history there. I know that you have a ranking, and I'd encourage anybody to go
Yes.
on the All 60 Pod, website, and you have full rankings there for all of the barns. It's an incredible read. What are some of your favorites? Obviously, I mean, it's easy to kind of look at the top 10, but what are some standout moments that you've had visiting all these rinks?
Well, and if people read my rankings, I make it very clear on the website that it's very subjective.
Yeah.
What you think is the best might not be what I agree with. There are brand new facilities that are just spectacular. There's a new rink down in Moncton, the Avonair Center. They seat 8,000 people. It is probably the best junior hockey specific arena in the entire CHL, maybe the world, and you got teams like the Quebec Remparts playing in what is essentially an NHL building. And of
Yeah.
course the Oil Kings playing in an active NHL building. It's kind of not fair to rank that as far as a facility against places like Owen Sound or Peterborough, right? But I enjoy going to the Owen Sounds and Peterboroughs more than those other ones, right? So I kind of rank the experience, looking at it purely from a junior hockey experience more than anything else. So, what I really like, old barns tend to, tug at the heartstrings a little bit with a lot of atmosphere. But what really will get me is if you're an old barn that has maintained your building well, and it doesn't feel like, it's not like you're cramped in there and there's no facilities, the bathrooms are short or anything. Like, ones that have managed to keep up with the times but still have that old barn atmosphere are the ones I tend to like. And I know, especially with everything that's been going on lately with the Memorial Cup announcement, I know Storm fans might want to pull my Storm fan card for saying this, but I actually have the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium ranked number 1 in the
Yes, you do.
CHL. And
Yes.
but some other ones, like I absolutely loved going to Prince Albert, the Art Hauser Center, for the home of the Prince Albert Raiders and the WHL. That rink was fantastic. Small barn, but everything, it was just a vibe. And, for an early season game, and the crowd was sold out, totally into it. And they were very friendly too. The game was against the Regina Pats. We were there with a friend of ours who's a Pats fan, and Prince Albert won the game 6-0 that night. And our poor friend, Matt Clark, I'll give a shout out to the Pats cast. He has a Regina Pats based podcast, but he and people were great to us all night. And particularly curious of Kevin and I, because we were in Guelph and London jerseys. So people wanted to come up and talk to us and stuff, more so there, I think, than anywhere else. So yeah, the old barns, I loved Val d'Or. Just trying to think of a couple more off the top of my head. Val d'Or, there's a lot more barns I find in Quebec than there are in the rest of the CHL. So Baie-Comeau was really cool. And rinks that aren't what we call the cookie cutter or clone rinks are the ones that really, get my motor running, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, I'd encourage anybody to check out the website and the podcast and get some more in-depth thoughts from Steve on all of these different rinks that you can visit, which is an amazing thing for our country to have this many amazing facilities to go to.
Right.
And I mean, I'm glad you gave some love to the Bayshore too, because I mean, the fries alone would bump it up my ranking. I'd be stuck like ranking everything based on the food on offer. So I'm glad that you had the Bayshore shout out there. Let's talk a little bit about the odd. Obviously, you mentioned that it's getting talked about a lot with the Memorial Cup bids. The odd, I think you said it about as well as you could on the website. It really is a cathedral of junior hockey. What is it about the odd that puts it over the top of everybody else for you?
I mean, people have said it in Kitchener, and I tend to agree. It is a cathedral of junior hockey, and maybe it's lost a little bit of luster after the renos, but at the same time, I don't feel like it took away from the old barn too much. And that's a building, as we know, it gets renovated frequently over the years, and so they've kept up. There are drawbacks to it, like if you're in the older seating kind of down low, it is very tight, and as someone who's the size of me, that's tends to not be good. But the atmosphere there is always fantastic. Lots of great options as far as if you're looking for food and beverage and everything, and just it's one of those buildings that you walk into and you could feel the history about it. They do a great job with their kind of store slash Hall of Fame area. It's terrible that it's the Kitchener Rangers in such a beautiful barn, but I love the Odd. I love going to games at the Odd and rinks like that. Another one that stands out to me is that we're going to be losing probably in the next decade or so is the Memorial Center in Peterborough. I love going to games there. They do a great job. It's another one of those buildings you walk into and you're like, that some great hockey has gone down here. Steve Yzerman played there, and a lot of other Hall of Famers have played there, and they do a great job. They have a fantastic Hall of Fame out in their lobby too. So rinks like that really, and as much as it pains me to say, as a Guelph Storm fan, the Kitchener Auditorium is a fantastic facility.
It's an amazing place for sure and deserves to be celebrated. And again, as you say on the website, if you haven't ever been there, I mean, definitely go and check a game out there. It's well worth your time. Let's talk a little bit about how you became such a big Guelph Storm fan, because obviously you got your start in Brampton where you grew up. Take me through how the Guelph Storm became such a big part of your life.
So I started with the Brampton Battalion, and I was a big fan of them, big as you could come. The problem was there wasn't nearly enough of us. A lot of games where there was only less than 2,000 people, less than 1,500 people, and God bless Scott Abbott for trying for so long, but eventually he had to pull the plug on that. And we had some great times there, and we did a lot of Sunday afternoon home games with the occasional Thursday and Friday nights thrown in there. So on a Friday night, when the battalion weren't playing at home or even on the road or anywhere, Guelph was kind of close, and so I found myself going to some Storm games when the battalion weren't playing. And then on top of that, the two teams had a lot of trades over the years. Of course, when Brampton had their best season in 2009, we acquired Storm goaltender Thomas McCollum, and he became a big part of that run. I have his game-worn jersey from Brampton that year. It's one of my most prized jersey possessions. And there's a lot of other trades too. I think of players like Cody St. Jacques and Kyle Pereira and Francis Menard, who played for both teams. So already there, it's kind of like I'm seeing a lot of Storm players and cheering for them, whether they went from Brampton to Guelph or vice versa. And then, Brampton and Guelph really weren't division rivals. They were very early on when Brampton was a Western Conference team, but that was before my time. So I didn't have any Brampton-Guelph rivalry. We only played twice a year. So when it was found out that the battalion were leaving, I had people ask me, are you going to be a Mississauga fan? And I thought, God, no, because that's our biggest rival. It's like asking a Storm fan to become a Rangers fan or a Knights fan. Plus, writing on the wall, I figured that team wasn't going to last anyway. I didn't want my heart broken again. So, Guelph was just kind of the natural progression of things. They were close enough that I could go to games regularly. They were kind of already my second team when I was still cheering for Brampton. So it became a pretty easy decision. And then that first season, I bought season tickets for the 13-14 season. And as we all know, that was a fantastic year. Did not see much losing that season. So it definitely made it easy to latch onto. And even when the team got very poor on the ice in the following years, I was all in at that point. And it's hard to believe now that I've been a Guelph Storm fan for much longer than I was a Brampton fan. I've been to more Storm games and more games at the Sleeman Center than I ever did in Brampton.
Yeah, I see you there often, man, and it's a great thing, and we love having you part of the fan base, and obviously a very exciting time for the fan base coming out of kind of a rebuilding phase as George Burnett continues to do some roster tinkering, and I'm sure we'll see more throughout the year, obviously recently with Jet Luchenko leaving town, but you're starting to see the fruits get bore of the last few drafts and some acquisitions that have been made. The team is playing much, much better. And of course, the big news this year is that the Memorial Cup is coming to town next season. So, when you hear that as a Storm fan, you find out, obviously, we're were in a bid with Kitchener, and a lot of people thought Kitchener had it locked up. Well, the Guelph Storm ended up coming out and getting the Memorial Cup for the first time since 2002. What was your initial reaction? And tell everybody what's special about Guelph in terms of being a host.
Yeah, my reaction, like a lot of people, I'll admit, I didn't think the Storm had as good of a chance as the Kitchener Rangers did. I think I held out a little bit more hope than most people. One of my podcast partners, Steve Clark with the Niagara Ice Dogs, he, right from the start of the season on all of our episodes, he said, Steve, this isn't even a discussion. It's going to Kitchener, no doubt. And I tried to give the Storm more credence, but I wasn't going to put money on it. So when I found out, I was just absolutely over the moon, like I'm sure a lot of people with the Guelph Storm were. And, I heard about all the work that they put in. And I, of course, just recently last week on my podcast, we had Matt Newby on, and he explained the whole process step by step. And, it's a testament to how hard everyone in the Storm organization works. And I've said, from the moment that it was announced, I'm sure Kitchener would have done a great job with this, but it just really felt like Guelph's time, the whole 200th anniversary, the bicentennial of the city of Guelph. And then just, I know the CHL has tried to pivot away and make it more possible for the smaller markets. Not that Guelph's a small market. I would call them more of a medium-sized market in the OHL, the CHL. But for a long time there, it was like, unless you've got 8,000-10,000 seats, we were seeing the tournament go into places like London and Quebec City on a regular basis. And not that they don't still have their place and aren't great hosts, but it's really cool when you go, like last spring, going to Rimouski in a 4,200 seat old barn and having great hockey. And then you go to, I think Saginaw a couple of years ago was one of the best hosts I ever saw. And they did such a great job. And going around town, you knew the Memorial Cup was in town. There were banners and things everywhere. And it's just like it took over the city for that 10-day stretch. Whereas there's been other places where you go and you take 10 steps away from the arena and you wouldn't know what's happening. So I think Guelph is going to do a great job with it. I love that it's in a smaller arena. I've said for a long time, I like that the Sleeman Center, even though it's roughly the same size as some other rinks in the league, it's obviously almost exactly the same as Sarnia and the Sioux, but at the same time it feels a little bit more intimate. And with some of the plans that they have with the one end where there's no seats currently, where Spike does his dance and bands play up there in what they're calling the loft, they're planning on doing stuff up there, and I feel it's going to just kind of bring the rink even in closer on the action. And I think it's going to be a great thing. And, I did live in Guelph for a few years there, back around the time that the Storm won the title in 2019. And it's a great community. And I think it's in the whole downtown area. I love, going down early before a game and you're able to park and then go and eat and do all that stuff. You don't have to, park somewhere, have dinner, then drive somewhere else. It's all kind of down in there in one spot. And I personally love it. And, obviously I'm biased. So, but it's great. I think it's going to be a great job that the Storm are going to do next year.
I agree. So you can find parking. That's
yes. Contrary to popular belief.
I'm just kidding, everybody. We're not trying to start a fight here. All right. But yeah, I agree. I agree for all the same reasons. I mean, Matt Newby, talk about the busiest guy in the CHL, jumping on this podcast last week. Go watch that if you haven't, on Steve's podcast as well. And yeah, he delved in on both of those episodes, like really into detail about what they did with the voting committee and taking them around the city and going to McCrae House and drawing up plans to have the parade through the park, and the Trews are going to play. And just there's so much stuff. They encapsulated the entire downtown area into their plan. It's really, really cool.
It really feels like almost, and from what I've heard, the committee was so impressed too. And I think with Memorial Cup bids going forward, it's going to be back in the queue for the next bidding process in 2028. And I almost feel like, I don't know if they're going to have the same people on the committee, but if they do, I feel like they're going to walk into whatever Q rinks are making presentations next year and go, okay, how does this stack up to Guelph? Because from everything I've heard, Guelph just went so all out to the point where they couldn't not give it to them. And I'm sure other teams, I'm sure the Rangers did a great job with their bid as well. But again, like I said, it feels like this was Guelph's time, and that bid that they put together, for anyone who hasn't heard, listen to my podcast, come back, listen to this one too, and what Matt has gone through and putting this together. It's just, they did a phenomenal job.
From your standpoint as a pretty diehard fan, I mean, it's got to, especially the experience you went through with the battalion leaving, it's got to make you feel pretty good knowing that the Storm are such a solid organization. They've got people like Matt Newby involved, and George and Scott, and go on down the list. The franchise is full of dynamite people who care so much about this team, and it's got to make you feel pretty good as a fan knowing that there's people involved from the top down that just want the very best for the Storm and the greater community as a whole too, because the team does so much fundraising work, and I mean, they're so involved and embedded in the Guelph community, Steve.
Yeah, like the biggest difference I find being from a Brampton Battalion fan to being a Guelph Storm fan is I never have to worry about losing my team again. Unless something crazy happens. But, in Brampton, the threat was always there, and we knew it. And, as much as, and we thought maybe that run in 2009, when we had some playoff games where the building was getting sold out, we thought maybe this will turn things around. And then the next season came around and it was back to 1,500 people on a Thursday night. So, in Guelph, there's not that issue. And I know I've seen clips from old Storm games back in like kind of the first decade that the Sleeman Center was operational in the 2000s. And there were a lot of games in Guelph where maybe there was only 2,500 or 3,000 people there. And you saw a lot of those blue seats on a TV broadcast. But over the years, it has seemed like it's evolved to the point where a crowd of 4,000 is a bad night for Guelph, right? Like the building is mostly full every night. And, talking to Brandon, who runs the store here at the Sleeman Center, he was telling me that he has people come up to him all the time and say, we're new to Guelph, and our neighbors say this is what you do in Guelph on a Friday night. You go to the Storm game. So I feel like it's getting to be a lot more people. It's almost like you wonder if the Sleeman Center is maybe just a touch too small with what's going on and the amount of people that keep coming out year after year. And you've seen, we've had some poor teams on the ice in the last decade. I think back to the teams in 2016 that were really bad in 2017. And even this past year where the team missed the playoffs. And yet, in those years, the barn is still full every night. Like I said, a bad night is 4,000 people. So people keep supporting this team. And I think it's gotten to that point where it's not just about the highs and lows of the Guelph Storm. It's just what people do on a Friday night. If you live in Guelph and you like hockey, you're going to the Storm game, and it's a social event, and it's been fantastic. And it's a good time going to a Storm game. And I think people, as much as they would rather the team on the ice winning, it doesn't matter if they're winning or losing. They just like being there.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot more winning coming around the corner here. I mean, the team's playing a lot better. And of course, next year, there's going to be a big roster project, of course, for George Burnett. But I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, last year, despite missing the playoffs, the Storm actually set an attendance record and had the third highest average attendance behind only Kitchener and London, with far bigger buildings. It's an incredible community. It's an incredible fan base. And you're an incredible part of that, my friend. I can't thank you enough for taking some time to jump on here. I'd encourage anybody to go check out the All 61 of CHL podcast. Go on Steve's website as well if you want to do some research. If you're thinking about trying to do All 61, get in there, do some fact finding, and learn a little bit about all of the great rinks that we have around the CHL. Steve, thanks so much for doing this, brother.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, let's do it again soon. We're gonna have to do a Memorial Cup preview at some point. Okay, we're
gonna have to do some sort of collaboration between the two shows.
Absolutely, I would be absolutely thrilled to do that. Remember, everybody, you can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast apps, YouTube, the Guelph Storm website, and remember, if you'd like to join Steve and the great Storm Nation fan base and come out to the Sleeman Center and take in a game, you can get tickets on the team website or the box office at the Sleeman Center. We'll be back next week with more Eye of the Storm.